Considerations in terms of going forward with the crop. So I would basically cover a little, what the current and what the potential yields are, looking at what we're getting in Trinidad, some of the other markets. We've heard a bit of this. Look at the issue of seasonality. Is it real? What do you think? And factors for increasing the yields. We can increase yield per plant, per unit area, and if we lose less, then we have more on the market. And then adoption of some technology, some of which you've seen before from Dr. C. Prasad, including employing labor-saving techniques. So I think most of you here have been exposed to CABI and PlantWise. Basically, PlantWise is a extension tool or model, if you want to call it that, of giving farmers appropriate advice, basically with the aim of reducing their crop losses. CABI has done what is called a systematic review, and have come up with a figure that if globally we can reduce the yields of crop loss by just 1%, we can feed 25 million more people per year. So that is the whole basis, the whole rationale of us getting donor funding in terms of running a program like this globally, yeah? And basically it involves running plant clinics or training people within the countries to run plant clinics or to come on your field and to be able to diagnose the problem fairly quickly and accurately and give you a very good recommendation so that you can reduce your yield. That's in a nutshell what the whole thing is. Plus, on the other side, we use, because our forte is really in information, we have a knowledge aspect of that where we have a database where we can then correlate pest and disease incident with climate and all those kinds of issues. And through running the clinics with the Ministry of Agriculture and NAMDEFCO, we got a sample. It was last August, September, around there. And then when we followed up in the field, we realized it was a very pervasive problem. And this is why we're here today from then to now in terms of trying to, and then we realized it was quite a big crop. It was almost at the level of an industry already. We've heard from the director this morning that it's up to 6 million pounds. $6 million or something, so she was saying. It's quite significant. So, as NAMDEFCO was just saying, if all the stakeholders can work together, we can really develop it into, probably not in the short term to compete with Costa Rica and Mexico, but certainly it can be a lot more competitive than it is now, and we can be using a lot more of the Christophene in terms of in the supermarket trade and the hotels and so on. When you look at, for example, the callaloo bush, and you look at the watercress, those are two commodities that the farmers seem to have matched with the market very nicely, because the price does not fluctuate at all, and it only increases very little. Over the past 20 or 25 years, the price may have gone just like less than 50% from 20 years ago, which is remarkable. So those farmers are really satisfying the market and they're making money. And I think Christophene is at a stage where you can get to that level where you don't have that price fluctuation, and therefore Christophene as a vegetable or as a fruit can be used more locally in all the segments of the market, the school feeding program where they have a very fixed budget, for example. So they're looking for good, reliable supply at a fixed price year round. That is some of the kinds of things that you want to start looking at. So we've heard a lot about, and I put this up, but I'm not going to go into it in any great detail. It shows where we are compared to some of the other countries. The production range from 7 to 75,000 pounds per acre per year. And that's 75,000 pounds per acre. When we collected the data in the field, those are some farmers who were getting those yields from recently planted crops. And that is something we're coming to in a bit. I think that's one of the key issues in terms of managing the disease. It is up to that yield that you're getting right here in Trinidad. So it is possible for you to be getting on a sustained basis over 60,000 pounds per year per acre. That's the takeaway from that. So if we set that as a realistic goal in the short term, to go from what the average was about, from about 33,000, we can almost double it almost immediately to about 60,000 pounds per acre per year. Yeah. When we look again at the data, and I think we've gone through this, there's a seasonality which is not common in the other areas. We don't see that phenomenon happening where you have a high peak and then a low of only about 20% of your peak in the other years. And the low period in Trinidad is about 7 months, and the average yield is about 20% of what it is in the peak. So you have a marked drop in your yield, and that, as we've seen, is really the rainy season. And I don't think it's all related to the disease. It is other things that we have to figure out. So some of the factors that we can look to play around with in terms of increasing yield is, one, increasing the yield per plant, increasing the yield per unit area, and I don't think we will be that successful in terms of increasing the yield per plant. It requires more, for example, genetic improvement and that kind of thing, which is more long term. But we can certainly aim to increase the yield per unit area. So if you have a 10 or 15 acre farm and you have problems with irrigation and all of that, and you can even get the same yield that you're currently getting in 15 acres in 2 or 3 acres, it will reduce your cost of production and more money in your pocket, basically. So that is one of the key areas that we want to look at in terms of increasing your yield per unit area. And then losing less in the field due to pests and diseases, to transport, post-harvest losses, and those kinds of things, right? So increasing yield per plant, we can start with better yielding varieties, again long term, and we need to, from what we've seen in the field, we can say that there are probably 6 distinct types. Don't know if we'll call them varieties, but there are about 6 different types. So there's certainly a bit of work straight away for the research division to do to characterize those types in terms of what are their average yield, their organoleptic, their properties, taste, and that kind of thing. Whether they're seasonal or not, those kinds of things. So characterize those types to see whether they're resistant to the disease and that kind of thing. So that's some work there, which is a little bit long term. We can play around with, there are no optimum fertilizer recommendation for Christophene in Trinidad. The soil types are slightly variable, but nobody has done any work to say what is the recommendation. Even among the farmers, some farmers believe that the chicken manure contributes to the disease, or the chicken manure is harmful. From the literature, from my general knowledge, I don't think we can make a pronouncement on that. Some farmers swear by the chicken manure. They use the majority of their fertilizer need come from the chicken manure. So those are other areas that we can work on again. So Dr. C. Prasad spoke about precision agriculture. If you look at corn, for example, when I was a little boy, we grew corn 3 feet apart. Now they're growing corn 6 inches apart. And for corn, it is worked out how much nitrogen, exactly how many days after planting, exactly how much nitrogen to apply, how much water to apply, everything. When to apply your pesticides and everything. It's worked out, it's referred to as precision agriculture. We need the work, we need the research division, we need the agencies in Trinidad, we need the input suppliers, people with the technology to work it out so we can tell you exactly how much water. So if you have too much, you have to put in drainage to make sure that you keep your soil moisture at a particular content, water content. You need to know exactly how much fertilizer, how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potash, whether you need sulfur, whether you need magnesium. All of those things need to be worked out for Trinidad conditions. We could only get so much from the literature, but if you put in, it seems that from the data, that the crop has a very good genetic potential to produce up to 120 1,000 pounds per acre per year. So, you know, if you can really capitalize on that by applying what it needs, when it needs it, we can get closer to that, which means that your production would increase and therefore hopefully your profitability as well. There are people on the market that supply growth regulators, crop hormones and that sort of thing that can help you both in terms of resistance to diseases, plus increasing your yield, improving the efficiency of your fertilizer that you apply and all of that. So all of those are technologies that are available that you can start using to increase your yields, right? And then the last one, proper management. And when we look at places like Costa Rica and Mexico and so on, the key thing, the major difference is that they do not produce the crop for more than a year. I know when we spoke to the farmers, people say, well, it can go 15 years. Why should I take it out after a year? That is one of the main significant difference between what you're doing and what Costa Rica is doing. They replant the crop every year. So they harvest basically 8 to 9 months of the year. They do have the same disease like you are having and some others that you don't have, but their yields are double yours and their quality of their fruits are much better. Yeah, and we'd see some of those things. So that is if there's one main recommendation that you can start, is do not keep your field or your plants for more than 3 years. I would say no more than 2. But and the other thing is that surprised me when I looked at the production is that we've been producing Christophene for about 60 years. And the only major innovation in that 60 years that I could notice was you went from producing it on trees almost in a wild condition to then producing it on a matchan, and now the matchan is a little bit more improved in that the matchan is, you don't have to redo the matchan every year. The matchan would go for 10, 12 years because you're using wire and steel to some extent and that kind of thing. That has been the only major innovation. So and that was the purpose of Dr. C. Prasad technology, that farmers, even in Trinidad, they're using a lot more technology. So if you really want to be successful at this crop, you really have to start adopting some of the technology. And in this session, we want to see from all what you've heard this morning, some of the things that you think that you would want to start looking into in the short term. So within the ministry and the other stakeholders, we can see how we can provide that help to get you one step further in terms of innovation. So increasing yield per area. This is a picture in Trinidad. That is Caraili, which is in the same family, same disease as well affecting it. And Caraili 10, 15 years ago was predominantly produced on a matchan, just like you're doing Christophene now. When I was a second year student at the university, I worked with a crop Barbadine, Passiflora quadrangularis, which again was just grown on a matchan, and I grew it on a vertical system. This is right up the street here, this crop. It is Caraili, it is grown vertically. You can see straight away in the same area, they're doubling their number of plants per area. So even though if you reduce your yield per vine, per unit area, you're getting a much higher yield. You can straight away double your yields. Yeah? So I think the Christophene average is like 5 meters by 5 meters, that's your distance. If you go with 5 meters, you're staying within the same row in the vertical system, same distance, but then you bring the rows closer, you go say 2.5 meters, you go from 444 plants per hectare to 860 plants per hectare. So the same amount of land, you're virtually doubling the number of vines that you have, and you're going to increase your yield. Plus, this makes it easier to apply pesticides, easier to harvest. We've spoke about the humidity, which is key in terms of the development of the disease. You're virtually getting rid of your humidity here. And it facilitates, and this is another thing that the Costa Rican farmers do. When they replant every year, they intercrop with things like beans and so on. Yeah? So it facilitates that intercropping even better. And then the other thing that you can do is, again, employing things like this is reducing the yields due to pests and diseases. We've seen in the field that some farmers are reporting up to 50% of the yield being lost due to diseases. So we can adopt more what we call in CABI more green technologies. Everybody you've been hearing talking about crop rotation this morning. I know from a scientific point of view that is what everybody's recommending. But what we are realizing now working with Plantwise in Trinidad is not only Christophene farmers continuously grow the same crop, but almost all the farms continuously grow the same crop, because it is a question of about building a marketing relationship. So you're known as a Christophene farmer, or you're known as a hot pepper farmer, or at least you have one main crop. You may have other things that you grow in terms of reducing your risk and that kind of thing. But so I'm not going to keep repeating crop rotation, because we know for a fact that that is not the reality in terms of the market. People want to continue growing the same crop. So the challenge now is for the scientists and the business people, the marketing people, and the farmers to all work together to see what we can do in terms of allowing you to grow the same crop year round. And that is what the biopesticides and what Dr. Sarah was saying in terms of, so that is, and then again, that is a little bit long term, 3 to 5 years kind of thing. So we can immediately start by something like the vertical trellis, improving your fertilization, improving your watering, improving your field layout. And then we get to the stage where if that is happening, then, because it requires a level of funding in terms of developing that. So you can't develop it for a very small industry. It makes sense to develop something like that and go down that path if we're going to have a sustainable industry. If we're going to have an industry of a certain size, it then encourages that kind of investment, yeah? One of the key things that we've noticed is that people are growing on fairly steep slopes. We did not do a detailed analysis in terms of labor, but in some instances, farmers were reporting it took 45 minutes to bring down 100 pounds of Christophene from a very steep slope up on the hill. It could be on average one man putting 100 pounds on his head, walking for half an hour to 45 minutes. And we've seen some of the technologies with the banana type things. Not a lot of the farms are steep, but also some were not that steep, that could have, with just some road access being built and so on, you can drive your four-wheel into it and create some paths. So for example, with the vertical system, you can lay out your field in such a way that you have not necessarily those monorail type arrangements, but you can have, like what they're doing in Costa Rica, even a dry part, a solid dirt in between, or a little bit of gravel, or just a concrete, small strip of concrete where you then roll something like a wheelbarrow that holds up to 8 crates. That is like about 800 pounds, and you're bringing it onto a pickup, starting that cool chain that Namdefco spoke about. So it really, immediately, there's a lot of innovative things that you can do that I think could be affordable for the farmers that are growing Christophene, that could significantly start improving your yields, reducing your cost of inputs, and reducing your labor costs, improving the quality of your Christophene that you're producing, and most of all, reducing that fluctuation in price and volume in the market. So the ones that are on the very steep slopes, you can do contour farming. if you must remain on those very steep slopes. The ministry has some incentives that you can actually contour the field, and then again, so it's a better layout that will help you to go vertical and intercrop and that sort of thing. So we discussed that. So we've seen some of the presentation. There are many ways of applying irrigation when it's needed, how much in a way that it would provide the right moisture content and not create the conditions for the disease to be favorable. Yeah? In terms of pesticide application, we down the road, it's more like the biocontrol, long-term sustainable solutions. Then people like Marcus Maiku from Marfas is here. He would tell you about droplet size and all those kinds of technologies that you can use, reducing the amount of pesticide that you're actually applying and having it more effective. Yeah? So there's a lot of technologies that are available right now that we can use. So some general recommendations. The lunch is going to be at 12:30. Some general recommendation is for the stakeholders working with the farmers is we need to start characterizing our varieties. Know what types, whether they have names, what are the genetic composition, are they types, varieties, whatever. What are they resistant to pests and diseases? What are their nutritional content? All of those kinds of things that you would need to know if you want to get into export markets and that kind of thing. Development of an IPM strategy, and I'm glad that we already have a project that can build on this. I think we know a fair amount of the economic impact of the disease, so we need to quantify that a little bit more in terms of securing further funding to get work in the area. And developing best practices for Christophene. Pesticide recommendation, fertilizer recommendation, irrigation recommendation, and all those basic things. How much you should apply, how often you should apply it, how deep to apply it, all those kinds of technical issues with fertilization that you need to know. And every farmer should need to have that kind of information to improve their production. And then field layout and the vertical trellis. So that is basically some general feedback from what we found and in terms of some way of going forward.